Welcome, everybody. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome you to this breakout session, Setting Expectations for Academic Integrity. I think we've put together a really stellar group of folks to talk about an important topic. For those of you who were able to join us for some of the earlier sessions, I hope that you found them informative, engaging, and thought-provoking. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome. What I'd like to do before I take an opportunity to introduce our panelists is to go over some logistics. Next slide, please. I wanted to let you know that this session will be recorded. As an overview of the agenda, I'll provide some brief introductions. We'll provide around 50 minutes of panel discussion framed by some specific questions, and then we will have an opportunity for open question and answer. I encourage you throughout the course of the presentation and our panelists' discussion to submit your questions in real time. Rather than run the risk of, oh, I had a great question and I forgot what it was, go ahead and send it off and we will curate those at the end, and then also offer an opportunity for real-time questions during the last portion of the session. So with that, let me take an opportunity, next slide, to introduce our panelists. We have Ulla Lechtenberg. Ulla is the Learning Design Coordinator at the University Library Systems. And in this role, she teaches students about academic integrity, by discussing and focusing on its role in the scholarly conversation, why citations matter, and through the mechanics of proper citations in various styles. We're also joined by John Twyning. John is the Associate Dean for Undergraduate Studies in the Dietrich School and College of General Studies. He oversees academic integrity policies and sanctions in those schools. As his title would suggest, and as a former chair in the English department, coupled with probably what's approaching 30 years in the classroom, you can well imagine that he has been at the forefront of thinking and working with AI issues at a variety of levels for a long time. And last but not least is Jeff Vipperman. Jeff is Professor of Mechanical and Bioengineering and Vice Chair of the Mechanical Engineering and Material Sciences Department here at Pitt. He's the inaugural chair of the Academic Integrity Committee for the Swanson School of Engineering, which over the last 2 years, this committee has established academic integrity policies and procedures for engineering, and now focuses on adjudication of these policies as well as the development of integrity-related educational programs for faculty and staff and students. So I think we've got a well-versed and well-informed panel to inform our discussion here. So to start out, I'm going to pose the first question, and that's a broad one. I think we all recognize that academic integrity represents, the commitment to and a demonstration of honest and responsible and fair behavior in the academic setting, that it allows students and staff the freedom to build ideas and knowledge and creative works while respecting and acknowledging the work of others. So what, in your experience among our panelists here, what are the primary challenges that you see to academic integrity, and what contributes to cheating, plagiarism, and other forms of academic dishonesty? And so we're gonna start out with Ulla.
Thank you. So, as a librarian, in my role as a librarian, I get to work with students at, various points of the research process. So although I don't get to teach semester-long classes, I might see students when they're first starting their research papers, or somewhere in the middle when they're trying to find more resources, and then definitely towards the end where they are searching for or practicing how to do citations correctly to make sure that they follow the guidelines, and also that they aren't plagiarizing, and they are following academic integrity guidelines. So through those experiences, what I've seen is a definite sort of sense of anxiety from students about getting it right in terms of plagiarism specifically, and getting citations right, the mechanics of citations. And I sort of want to take a compassionate view of what contributes to cheating and plagiarism, in kind of acknowledging that a lot of our students are really overwhelmed. And while that, I don't want to make that sound like an excuse, we do see that students are taking a ton of classes all at once, maybe trying to finish as quickly as possible, trying to cram in as much as possible. And so that it starts to be difficult to juggle a lot of responsibilities. So potentially plagiarizing or cheating kind of comes into the fold, because that will help them get through a particular course or a particular semester. Again, that's not an excuse, but I definitely do think that that plays a role in why students cheat. And again, my perspective maybe is going to be quite different than my fellow panelists as a librarian. But with regards to research paper assignments and plagiarism specifically, sometimes I get a sense that many students might not understand the purpose of the assignment, and so, or why it's important for it within the context of that particular class or the program that they're in. So maybe that they start to think that it isn't important, and cheating or plagiarism sort of doesn't matter in that context. And to me, it seems like talking to them about their role, the student role in the scholarly conversation, and sort of putting a context to why they might need to be doing a research paper for a particular class, so that it's not so much a vacuum, right? So it is for that particular class, but by putting the context that actually they're participating in a larger scholarly conversation within the within that particular subject or course, then they start to see why it's important to act ethically within that conversation, because it isn't just a vacuum within that course. And the other thing that I sort of want to mention before handing it over to my fellow panelists is sort of these maybe assumptions that we have, that students know exactly what we mean when we say academic integrity, and particularly, considering the keynote this morning, if you were able to attend that, and around inclusive teaching. Considering international students who might not have the vocabulary to understand academic integrity as we understand it at our institution, or even first-generation students not really understanding or seeing or understanding the background of that particular part of being in academia, being a student in academia. So those are sort of my initial thoughts for that particular question.
Thank you. Thanks, Ula. John, what's your perspective on that issue?
Yeah, so as the dean in Thackeray who oversees it, there's the vast majority of cheating happens in two forms. One would be plagiarism in essays and that kind of process. The other thing would be cheating on exams of some kind. But I think there's some similarities in terms of what how that happens and what the challenges are. And I think there are growing challenges in some ways. I think that social media of all kinds is an issue that we have to grapple with. There are, for instance, there's a lot of student help sites out there that will, workshop your your material, and you know, that can be abused, that system. I totally agree with Eula on the pressure thing, and I think we should think of pressures in all kinds of ways: parental, personal pressures. And I'm thinking too here, this could come up in almost any of the categories here, is that the emphasis on like a large all defining final is about the worst thing you can do in terms of trying to avoid cheating. If you have a lot of low stakes assignments or different kinds of assignments that build up, first of all, it establishes the record with the student, so they wouldn't want to see an anomaly, and you would have some alert to what was going on. It would also mean, were they to cheat on one of the smaller papers, then you wouldn't have to issue such swinging penalties that, which I'm not sure threatening students with swinging penalties is. I don't know that that's altogether a challenge, but it's not a solution. And the other reason to think carefully in the future is that a lot of our students are going to come in the coming years. Now, most of our schools have gone test optional. That means that they might not be as good as they are academically to get to PIT. They might not be the best at taking tests, and so that we'll need to think about that. I also think that we need to be aware of kind of cultural perspectives, both within and without. What are cultural norms? How are they being discussed? And part of the thing is I think it's sometimes hard to know what's at stake in your education. The big problem with cheating is that you're just cheating yourself. I know that seems like a platitude, but and you know, you may not view it like that if you're planning to cheat or cheating, but that would be in fact the case. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there. That's they're the main points. Thank you.
Thanks. Jeff, your experience in your role, both within the School of Engineering and as chairing the committee, which has been thinking, you know, deeply and heavily about this for a while.
Yes, thank you, Michael. Ula and John had some fantastic points. I guess one of the more surprising findings for myself in working in this area is that I would go as far to say that many of our students don't know wrong from right. And I think that a lot of the sort of knowledge of that we take for granted. I think students are coming in with some bad habits from high school, perhaps. I think that certain behaviors in terms of cheating have been normalized to the point where it is hard for our students to discern between what's cheating and what's not cheating. And so, Ula did a nice job, and John, talking about the excuses for cheating. And so there is a good bit of data out there on that. And of course, peer pressure, opportunity. You see someone's paper, you can't resist. Saving a scholarship. Those are kind of some of the standards. But the ones that I think might be more interesting to focus on are the ones that I think are really potentially in our purview. And so those include things like students perceive too much busy work. And that's without judgment, right? If we are giving them a lot of work, I think maybe if we could spend a little bit of time motivating why we're asking them to do this or asking so much of them, it could help with that type of perception. Along the same lines, asking too much of them in the course can seem useless is another common excuse that students give for cheating. But one that's particularly striking is that they'll use is that my instructor doesn't care. And that can come in two forms. My instructor doesn't care that I'm learning, or my instructor doesn't care if I cheat. You know, he or she doesn't do anything about it. And so, I think, you know, if we give pause and think about how we might get through to our students a little bit better. The other thing I would say is that we've really entered into what I call an arms race with our students in terms of cheating technologies. John alluded to the standard cheating websites such as Chegg, Course Hero, but then also they have communication platforms, Discord servers, GroupMe, and other types of platforms that are used for cheating. And when I first started this, I used to think that we could win this arms race. But now I'm having a very different thought about that. I don't think we can win this arms race, and rather I think the best approach is to appeal to our students and try to convince them that integrity is not only good for them and their personal lives, but foremost their careers, because our product, after all, is employees. So I think I'll leave it at that.
Great, thank you. I think you've all done a nice job at identifying the complexity and the multi-deterministic nature of the motivations or the drivers for academic integrity, or challenges to it, which can be cultural and sociocultural. It can be structural. It can be pedagogical. There's a whole vast array of student-centered kind of dispositions or attributions, relationship-bound. I think it highlights the fact that it is challenging, and there's no silver bullet solution that can address all of those in one fell swoop. So thanks. So given that, the next logical question is, how do we communicate, either both directly or indirectly, with our students about academic integrity? And then a related and follow-up, so this really is a two-part question. What kinds of resources are available to support our efforts, both in communicating with them and helping them understand the value and the benefits more deeply? So kind of two-pronged question. How have you found, or what do you have in terms of recommendations for communicating with students, and what kind of tools are out there to support? And we'll start this one off with John.
Yeah, thank you. And I think I'm going to actually nicely tail on to some of the points that Jeffrey was making there. What to communicate to students, and I do think this is probably the one area that we could both improve and maybe one of the most effective areas. Typically, not every time, but quite often, students, a case of academic integrity violation will come to our office, and it's like the first time that the member of faculty has been involved in that, the instructor. And so they don't know what to do. They may not have communicated correctly or adequately to the student what their policy is on it's no good just saying, putting a line or two in the syllabus. You've got to really communicate to students. You've got to take it up in class at the beginning of the class. You've got to tell students what your expectations are, what they risk by, cheating or plagiarizing, being absolutely clear what you mean by plagiarizing, what you mean. And this is, again, there's new technology. If you say something like open book, for instance, but what happens if you don't have a book? What is a book? And I think there are just so many areas that we need to be thinking about what we, and be absolutely clear. The other thing that happens is that, this usually happens after the event, but sometimes the punishment way outweighs the crime. So, a couple of missed citations, but because it's cheating, they want to fail the student with the course without telling them that what the penalties are. And I think some working together with other people in your department and working up a set of guidelines that are appropriate for cheating and also for communicating would help. It's also good to tell your students that you know that cheating is out there, and that you know how to find it, even if you don't always know all the ways to find it. But just letting them know that you're not, that you're not so caught. I actually don't know what the life of students are like. At the same time, I think you've got to give them, help and support if they're struggling in a class, and be proactive about that. If someone's struggling in a class, you can tell them to go to, take a tutoring course, or go to the writing center, or the math center, or whatever, and get them the support they need, and even think about offering those kinds of things yourself. So I think the thing is, in the class, we often don't want to imagine it's happening, and then when it happens, we don't really know what to do when we sometimes do the wrong thing. And it should be clear right from the start what you mean by, cheating, and you'll know it when you see it. The other thing too, just a simple thing: don't keep using the same exam every year. You'd be surprised how often this happens. And if you go on any of these sites, if you go on Reddit, it's an eye opener. You go on Reddit, and they're all swapping these exam questions around, knowing that you never change them. So I think letting students know that that there's both support and but the definitions of what you want from them, what their expectations are, and also I would always point out that it is a matter of self-disenfranchisement if they do cheat, and it's disrespect to the other students, because they're kind of cheating, whether you're grading on a curve or not. It's kind of cheating you're cheating the other students as well. Thanks.
Jeff, your thoughts?
Sure. I think it's less important how we talk to our students as it is how often we talk to our students. I've noticed a lot of faculty seem to be sort of fearful, for lack of a better word, to engage in the conversation with their students. But I think that if you start that conversation, I think you might find that it's a rewarding one. If you want to start somewhere, I think clearly communicating our expectations throughout the course. So that includes starting with our syllabus at the beginning of the semester, and taking time to talk through the policy and what it means to you and why you think it's important. For every assessment that I give, I clarify what the rules are, whether it's open book, closed book, open internet, things like that. Disallowing cheating sites, no communication with other people, things like that. And then, it needs to be really clear to the student what does and does not constitute an AI violation. If for no other reason, if you go to adjudicate a case, if there's no clear policy, then the case is really a little tenuous. Also, I think sharing our personal stories about integrity, and you don't have to get too personal here, but just small, like I've personally been plagiarized. I had one of my journal papers republished in another journal by a set of different authors, so I can talk about that. And really, I think we spend a lot of time talking about professional ethics, and we talk about things going wrong, so bridge collapses, things of that nature. And what I found is that students, it's really hard for them to picture themselves as a professional yet. They're still in student mode, and they're thinking, oh, that's other people and that happens to them, that doesn't happen to me. So sometimes I think if we can break down things into simpler moral dilemmas, you know, like human relations or things of that nature. Also, I think I try to remember that we also communicate with our actions. And so we really have the opportunity to be examples of integrity to our students. And we also communicate by whether or not we adjudicate integrity cases. So we have the opportunity to show that it's important to us or not. At least that's how the students will interpret it. And then finally, I've learned from student members of our academic integrity committee that academic integrity, the phrase, is actually a trigger phrase for our students. And so on one hand, I would love to debate that and think about how we got here, but on the other hand, maybe the more important thing is that sorry about that. Maybe the more important thing is that we meet them where they are. And so one of the things I try to do is word things more positively. So instead of saying, you know, don't plagiarize, you know, I might say, here's how to avoid being accused of plagiarism. And so ULA has done, ULA and the ULS has done a wonderful job of creating educational materials for our students. And they do a very nice job of putting things in a positive framework.
Great, thank you. Ula, that was a nice segue to you and some of the work that you and your colleagues in the library have done. So your perspective on how to communicate effectively, both directly with students and indirectly, and some of the tools that might be perhaps available to help support faculty in those efforts.
Yeah, I agree with both what John and Jeffrey said about being much more transparent throughout the course, from the syllabus to every single assignment, as to what expectations you have for each and every thing, a single thing. I'm sort of coming back to the keynote. There was a discussion of kind of both top down, bottom up, through the middle. And I think that that is probably the best way to kind of infuse understanding, not only understanding, but also respect and actively motivating students to talk about and I guess respect academic integrity. So some of the things that I have thought of for this particular question, modeling behavior that you want to see in your students. So I think Jeffrey was just saying that, giving an example of what has happened to him in terms of being plagiarized, but also, you know, how do you, as, you know, a researcher, as a scholar, incorporate other experts' work into your own research, right? So how do you engage in an ethical way with other people's research, and showing that to students on, you know, a very consistent basis, kind of weaving it in almost into the way that you teach your particular subject area. And then in terms of plagiarism specifically, like spending some time and showing how experts in your field cite the work that they use, right? So looking at a research article and looking at a literature review, and how is something cited in that particular literature review, and what's expected in your field, which sort of kind of, again, solidifies and embeds, weaves in that understanding of ethical use of information, ethical use of other people's research in your particular field. And I sort of want to go back a little bit to, you know, contextualizing the scholarly conversation and potentially making assignments or the results of assignments almost public, right? So is there a way that your assignment can be consumed outside of your class, right? Is there a blog that you can put together, a wiki, or have students submit something to D-Scholarship so that it isn't so insular and it becomes like, oh, I'm making something that's for an external audience and wanting to participate in that particular, again, scholarly conversation. And I think Jeffrey also talked about some real life examples. And I even, this again, from my perspective as a librarian, sometimes using those real life examples of like sampling music, like when is sampling music plagiarizing someone else's music, right? Sort of that like pop culture or general knowledge that's not necessarily within your discipline, but can help illustrate some things about academic integrity and cheating and plagiarism that then you could connect to your particular subject. So, and some of the resources, so I am very, very new to the ULS, but we do have an academic integrity module that my colleagues have put together that is in Canvas and results in a badge for students once completing those modules. So, and thank you for saying that it's very welcoming and not punitive. That's really good feedback. So kind of, again, coming at the topic at almost every angle, right? So from the bottom up, I think John mentioned the sort of middle, like how can you and your department all talk about academic integrity and outline all those things, and then enforce and talk about throughout the semester.
Great, thank you. So there were some clear themes that arose across that discussion. If you'll indulge me for a moment, there was this clear desire to, or support for articulating and being very explicit in communication about expectations, about definitions, about what it is that you mean in your particular assignment, in your particular course, in your particular content or context. Another thing that I think is really important was the need for continuous conversation, right? It's not just step at the very front, but it's continuous and imbued across the context of your course, and I would argue across the context of the student's development in a curriculum or their professional development. There was an acknowledgement that tone can be important, taking an approach that empowers the student to be successful in their professional endeavors, and doing so in a way that isn't punitive. And then the desire to model, to provide examples, and to demonstrate professional behavior that recognizes and demonstrates the value of academic integrity in our own practices. Those were all kind of themes that I think orient us all to the kind of things that you pointed to. So thanks very much. The next question, and this is going to be our final one. So feel free, and we're doing good on time. So feel free to take your time as you respond to this. Where should faculty start, right? From your perspective, what are the three most important things that you would recommend to either address academic dishonesty, or to minimize it in that arms race? And I think I would layer on top of that, and we haven't discussed this, we've been focused very much on specifics, but building a culture of academic integrity where it's valued and supported and demonstrated. So, I'd really like some, if you have some ideas about concrete, actionable, take-home strategies from your point of view. So we'll start out here. Jeff, from your perspective?
Sure. So what I think one of the most important things, aside from the communication part that I talked about, is consistent enforcement. So I've talked a lot about meeting students where they are, trying to be understanding and positive, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that we turn our backs on academic dishonesty. It's sort of, I heard a comparison of the death penalty versus a speed trap. So, clearly the death penalty doesn't dissuade people from killing each other. But a speed trap, I think we all slow down for a speed trap if we know that it's there. You can also, there are plagiarism tools that you can use. So Turnitin, which is built into Canvas, you can simply check a box. By the way, we don't usually let our students see the originality reports. And it can take some time to interpret those types of reports. Referring our students to the ULS educational tools. And by the way, ULS has developed a custom educational program for the School of Computing and Information. And they're helping the School of Engineering develop ours too, because it seems like the different schools have sort of some subject specific type of information to use. Also, I think it's important to, one of the things we're trying to do in engineering is create a support network for our faculty, because a lot of times faculty don't even know where to get started, and it might be easier just to try to ignore something that's going on rather than dig into it and see if there's some sort of foul play or not. And so we've created a SharePoint site with guidance on step-by-step adjudication process, and so those are some of the things that come up to mind. In terms of assessments, if you assess higher up in Bloom's taxonomy, it's a little bit harder for students to cheat or go to cheating sites in order to get answers. And John already mentioned, sort of big high value assessments, break them up into smaller, lower point value assessments. So, I think I'll leave it at that.
Great, thank you. Ula?
I guess I have sort of some more on the ground things or practical things that individual faculty members might want to do. And it sort of reiterates some of the things we've already said. So, don't assume that students are on the exact same page as you in terms of academic integrity. So take the time to define it together, collaborate on examples, or at least show examples, from the perspective of, maybe more humanities or social sciences, examples of how other scholars incorporate each other's work, also demonstrate solving problem sets, show students how you do that, can kind of open the door to something that they don't do about in terms of academic integrity. The second thing is kind of piggybacking off of what Jeffrey just said about bigger assignments. So definitely scaffold big assignments into smaller parts. And this is particularly useful for research assignments, research paper assignments, where potentially you have, first you have them pick out a topic and then an annotated bibliography and then write out an outline so that it's not just the big paper at the end of the semester. And you might also start to consider alternatives to a traditional research paper to get at that same sort of teaching students how to do the research process in different ways. And consider moving some some like writing, in-class writing or in-class homework. So doing that together in small groups, even in a Zoom environment, having students engage with the session that they just had, having a reflective essay, and grading those smaller parts, again, versus a larger assignment at the end. And I think definitely in terms of that middle ground, departments coming together and talking to each other about how to support that culture of academic integrity.
Thank you. John, lend us your wisdom. What would be your go-tos?
I think we've already had the wisdom. I think my first move would be to have Ula come to all the departments. And I agree with everything she said. I'm just, in a way, I'm just going to reiterate some. I do think this issue about the assignments is probably one of the major areas that we can actually do something productive. Not just breaking it up. I think making it clear to students what you're testing, and make sure that aligns with the goals of the course. So don't just, I'll give you an example of where, so I found somebody teaching a Shakespeare course in English, and all they were doing, despite all the wonderful things that you can say and the kind of way in which you can learn to understand Shakespeare, all he did, the instructor, was just give them a test on the knowledge, like who was Hamlet's mother and things like that. And of course, there were many students who liked that because it was, and nobody ever complained about, when they didn't know, because they thought, well, that's a test and I didn't get that right. So but in fact, it was not testing what the class was about and what it was doing. So I think sort of awareness about that. I do think, I think there are many departments that just haven't even, had this conversation. And then the first time it crops up for some instructors, and we have, many instructors, and some of them are just, coming on board for the first time, that they don't, it's just a crisis, and they deal with it as if it's a crisis. Whereas if there was a context of understanding and you knew where to go, maybe someone in the department, like the director of undergraduate studies, could be a point person who would know what to do, that you could talk to before it happens, because inevitably it will. And the other thing is, you can work. Some assignments are less. You're less able to cheat on them than others, right? So I think working with your colleagues to find out, so what do they do, and how do they address this? Because I think we're a little bit too isolated as instructors, that we don't really want to talk too much about our kind of pedagogy sometimes, whereas there are areas where it could be kind of really productive. I think that's the main points. I think a lot of them I would just kind of reiterate, and I've got I'm glad this is recorded, because this will be very valuable as we go on.
Thanks. So I want to remind those who are participating, feel free to submit any questions into the chat window. We do have one that's been submitted, so I'll pose it to the group to respond as you like. And I think it's a very reasonable one. So from Ashley Firm, how do you communicate? And we were talking about explicit communications and setting expectations. How do you communicate these ideas and these concepts without seeming too harsh? That is, I want to be clear with students, but don't want them to become fearful of me or the course. That I'm adding here that somehow there's a police state that's going to look at every single move. So any thoughts about boots on the ground of actually making those expectations and communications explicit in a way that students really hear and internalize.
Well, I mean, very briefly, I would begin by offering the support for, I would talk about the support they can have if they're struggling in class first. Talk about the support if they get into difficulties, to alert you, and that you don't mind, because that's part of the process. Not everybody knows everything right off the bat. And make sure that they have a sense of where they could go if they are having difficulties. So I would start with a more friendly approach, but also user-friendly approach, so that give them some solutions before you talk about how you deal with a problem.
Any of the other panelists have anything to add to that?
So one of the things that I try to do is try to show them that it's important. And there's some great quotes out there by Warren Buffett. So one of my favorites is, he looks for three things when he hires a person. He looks for drive, he looks for intelligence, and he looks for ethics. And he goes on to say, if they don't have that last one, you better hope they don't have the first two either, because they will bury you. And so, for a notable billionaire, obviously, arguably a very successful person in business, to make a comment like that, hopefully is striking to the students. It certainly is striking to me. And also, I present data to them in terms of the risks of ignoring academic integrity. So I think one of the perceptions that our students have is that I'm just going to cheat to get into a good high school. I'm just going to cheat to get into a good college. I'm just going to cheat to get a good first job. But what we know is that if that's not arrested, it does continue into the adult life. And so, for example, in engineering, I can't speak to other fields, half of new hires are fired for ethics violations. And similarly, half the reprimands are also due to ethics violations. And really, when you start to look at the other categories that they have, late for work, in my mind, that's still an ethics violation. So it's probably truly more than half of people get fired due to lack of ethics. And so they followed people, and they found they're 3 times more likely to lie to a customer or inflate an insurance claim. And that latter one could land you in prison, by the way, or cheat on taxes, et cetera, lie to a boss, inflate an expense report, things of that nature. So part of me does try to appeal to reason, I guess, with the students. And I'll say that, when I was a young professor, I personalized it when a student cheated, and I would get very angry with them. And now I just try to keep my cool, and just talk to them. And you'll know in 5 seconds whether or not the student is worth talking to or not. And the ones that are worth talking to, I spend a lot of time and just talk with them about ethics. Some I'll give an ethics assignment while we're waiting to get our educational modules in place. So.
It makes me think of motivational models. Ultimately, we hope our students are motivated to behave in an ethical way that demonstrates academic integrity. And so what you've hinted at, and there, at the very least, there are 2 fundamental elements to motivation, right? They have to recognize the value of ethical behavior, both for their personal, their professional, their role as engaged citizens. And so whether it's pointing out Warren Buffett or some notable person who identifies the value of it, we have to get them to connect to that. It also makes me think of what I call the double A's in being an advocate and an ally for our students' success. And sometimes that means having difficult conversations, right? I want you to be successful. I am an advocate and an ally for your success. And that means you need to understand the importance and the value of academic integrity and the consequences. And I think when you frame those things, those kinds of conversations in those terms, it's easier sometimes for students to have to hear them. Good.
Or as I like to say, Michael. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I was just going to say, as I like to say, the similarities between parenting and teaching are striking.
Exactly. Again, if you have any additional questions, in the meantime, I'm going to raise the issue about the culture of academic integrity on the campus or the institution as a whole. Do you think there are things that we might do institutionally to support greater salience, greater recognition for the role of academic integrity in terms of the recognition, the reputation of the institution as a whole or individual programs? And my apologies, I'm throwing this out there without any foreshadowing of that, but you know, if you want to riff for a second, that would be great.
You know, maybe, Michael, what people think about that one, I'll just throw out one more thought that I had, and that is, it's not too late to get through to our students. I'm stepping outside my field here, but we know that the final stage of maturation for our brains is the age of 25. And so our students do still have some pliability left in them. And so it is worth, in my mind, it's worth it for me to make the effort to try to get through.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. There's still a lot of development that's happening in the context of the years in which we see both our undergraduate and our graduate students. And we can still have a significant impact on those developmental processes that can have significant and long-lasting influence into the rest of their lives. How about the panelists' point of view or thoughts about the institutional kind of perspectives on the culture of academic integrity? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, just a couple. I do think when I mean, we've had some problems, as you all know, with things like Chegg, you know, and all the rest of it. I don't know that we've you know, and I know this is, you know, a nationwide issue, a problem, but I'm not quite sure, you know, have we got a, well, I don't know, a policy, but what happens if a student goes on those sites and it must be very tempting if you've got a risk reward situation where the risk seems minimal, but the reward is so high if you can just cheat on that final. But I wonder whether there's more we could do to let students know about if they do go to those sites, then, you know, like, here's some guidelines, because I think they're, from what I understand, is that they're kind of, you know, seductive. I'm not sure they actively suggest cheating, but they do keep you, like a lot of algorithms in social media, they start to channel you in the areas that are productive for them and not necessarily good for you. And so I think more understanding of that we, if I was to go back in the classroom, it's been a while since I've taught, I think I'd want to know. And I did, you know, in terms of plagiarism, one of the sort of wider issues that, you know, you can get someone to, you know, you can pay someone to write the essay for you if they're an expert. But if you've already got some way of understanding that, then you can, you know, challenge a student. But these sites that are often related to the, you know, science field do seem to pose a problem. And I don't know that we have kind of an institutional way of dealing with them.
Great. So, absent any specific questions coming from the broader group, what I'd like to do is remind folks that there are a number of resources. Certainly at the Teaching Center's website, there are strategies for reducing cheating behaviors in the context of assessment. And there is always the opportunity, if there are particular issues that are related to your concerns regarding academic integrity, the opportunity to reach out and meet with one of our consultants. The Provost website has a resource, a number of resources about academic integrity. One in particular that outlines, if you're not familiar with them, the guidelines on academic integrity for student and faculty obligations and hearing procedures. And then, as Jeff pointed out, there is the International Center for Academic Integrity that has a number of resources that are available to support strategies and informations and perspectives on issues related to academic integrity. So we'll give in the last 3 or 4 minutes here any last minute comments that the panelists would like to make or observations. Before we do that, I want to remind everyone that following this session is the open poster session for the conference, and you can access that through the main room in Excel events. Thank our participants for their for joining us. Acknowledge the wealth of information on the panelists, and now an opportunity. Oh, Jeff just posted the International Center for Academic Integrity in the chat room, the link to that. Thank you very much. Any last minute observations or comments from the panelists? Ula, anything you want to say?
It sounds like we all really need to still talk to each other. So hopefully we can continue the conversation amongst our fellow faculty members in different departments, and hopefully that'll help kind of, again, engender that culture of academic integrity.
With that admonition, I think there has been some discussion, largely coming out of a discussion that the group of panelists had here about perhaps forming a university-wide maybe forum that addresses or talks to each other about issues related to academic integrity across units, perhaps brings an opportunity to come together with some frequency, and then maybe a more frequent channel in which to share information, challenges. As Jeff, I think, recognized, there's this arms race, so we're constantly trying to figure out what the new challenge is and how do we address it. And so to the extent as a collective, we might bring that wisdom together. So the Teaching Center is thinking about actually putting together some kind of group to address those issues. Sorry to jump in there. John, Jeff, any last minute thoughts as we're coming down to the last moment? All right. Thank you all so much. I encourage you to visit the poster session and have a great weekend. Thanks again.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.